People, the end of the work week. For some people, not the end of the work week, but however you look at it, it's part of the week, right? Looking through the December 2017 issue of the Science of Mind magazine, I found another article that I liked. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's too long, but I will read the first page of it and then make some comments on it. I think it's a pretty good article, actually. It's by Dennis Merritt Jones. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a doctor of divinity, and seems a pretty interesting guy. And he is talking about mindfulness. That's what the whole thing's about. First quote is from Ernest Holmes, but the only quote actually is from Ernest Holmes in the Science of Mind textbook, who says, "Man, that's human, would have no burdens if he." Okay, humans would have no burdens if they kept high watch toward the One, if they always turned toward God. And you can substitute whatever word you like for God. You'll see what it means. And this article actually, it's religiously, spiritually oriented, but it actually applies to anybody, whatever your belief in life is, whether you have belief or no belief. Well, everybody has belief in something, but you know what I mean. He says, "Have you ever welcomed an unwelcome, invasive? Have you ever had unwelcome, invasive thoughts pop into your head and take your mind hostage, dominating your focus of attention? If you are like most people, and I would say almost everybody, your answer is yes. Usually those types of thoughts are negative, they're fear-based, and they're attached to either the future or the past, where a sense of powerlessness runs rampant." He says, "I recall a period in my life as a boy, and even as a young adult, when I was compulsively addicted to negative thinking. My mind could conjure up things to obsess about regardless of where I was or what I was doing. A constant barrage of fear-based thoughts consumed me, chasing me around like a dog pursuing a frightened rabbit into a burrow and keeping it imprisoned there. The reason I'm telling you this is that years ago, thanks to my mother, in parentheses, who was my first spiritual teacher, I learned a mindfulness practice that enabled me to observe and stop those invasive thoughts. And now, with great respect, I would like to pass her wisdom on to you. I remember the day I told my mum that my mind was perpetually filled with worry, fear, anxiety, and a sense of dread. Paraphrased, here is what she said. In ancient times, many cities erected tall towers along their perimeter, in which watchmen were posted with the order to be constantly vigilant and observant, thus ensuring that the well-being of citizens was safeguarded from invading forces or unwelcome visitors. Because they were elevated in their towers and on duty around the clock, they were literally holding the, quote, high watch, unquote, allowing them to identify anyone approaching in time to close the gate if necessary. He said, "Son, you must learn to stand guard at the temple gate and hold the high watch." That's the quote from his mother. She went on to explain that the temple was my mind, both conscious and subconscious, and the guard at the gate was my ability to consciously observe and decide what thoughts I would allow to enter my mind and occupy space. She also said that once identified as friend or foe, I could either turn the thought away or choose to welcome it. He goes on to talk about how later he discovered new thought pioneers like Emma Curtis Hopkins and Ernest Holmes, who taught this importance of holding the high watch. And he says they added the understanding that it wasn't only a mental exercise, but it was a spiritual practice as well. So, in other words, it can be just a mental exercise, but it can also be a spiritual practice. And then he goes on to explain that, we're creatures of habit, and the only way to break your habit really is to replace it with something else. So he goes on then to talk about mindfulness and that it's not an easy thing to do, that it is difficult. Therefore, that's why it's called practice. We have to keep practicing. So it's ironic because yesterday in the talk I gave at Toastmasters, and I mentioned last night, I believe, I was talking about mindfulness. And the easiest way to practice it is to start in small steps and just to practice what you're doing. So for instance, you can do this when you're walking around. Just be conscious of walking. So as you're walking, or as we're walking, often we're thinking, if I'm coming from the bedroom to the living room, I'm thinking, gee, what do I have to do when I get there? But if we just stop and don't do that, if we just concentrate on walking, whether it's from the bedroom to the living room, the bathroom, outside, in the yard, walking down the street, to be just conscious of walking. And then, as I've often pointed out in the past, when you clean your teeth, just be conscious of cleaning your teeth. And these are kind of baby steps in mindfulness. But what you get to do is you get to practice being in the moment. That's what you're doing. You're practicing being in the moment. And then begin by taking small amounts of time each day just to sit and watch your mind and just observe it. And you'll often find that when you sit there and observe it, all the intrusive thoughts that are coming in, when you're observing them, it's as if they don't want to be seen. So they kind of stop. And from there, you can build that up, and you can build it up into a meditation practice. You can build it into a contemplation practice where you actually focus on one particular idea, for instance. In other words, what we're doing is we're training our minds to move towards the positive by observing what's coming in. And then if you see something coming in that's negative, you can say, delete, delete, stop, no, I don't want you, get out. And as Merritt Jones points out, it's not an easy thing to do, but when you continually do it over time, it becomes in itself a habit. And eventually those negative thoughts are replaced with positive. One way I find is if I find that there's been a situation in the world that's really awful, and when I go to bed at night and my mind brings it back up, I will replace it with love. I will just simply keep repeating the word love, love, love. So whether you're spiritual, religious, or not at all, it's a wonderful practice because it benefits you tremendously. You have a much easier mind, and believe me, it impacts your body as well in a positive. That is what I've got. I give as an affirmation, I stand guard at the gate. And obviously it's the gate of my mind. I stand guard at the gate of my mind. So that, folks, is my offering for today. You will get another offering tomorrow. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm going to be guided by the spirit that I choose to have guide me. And whatever I come up with will be perfect just in that moment. So why? Because as Reverend Lisa, my colleague, often says when she gets up to pray at our service, that sometimes she has no idea what she's going to pray about when she gets up there. And she lets go and she lets God, and what comes out is what's intended to come out. And I do the same when I do spiritual mind practice. I allow the wisdom of the divine to run through me and to speak in my place. And just like my late mentor, the late great Bob Proctor used to say, I have license to brag about all this because none of it is mine. So, Reverend Lisa, 9:15 tomorrow on the Creative Life Spiritual Center's Facebook page. I'll be back on wherever you found this and whenever you find it. So until next time, but for those who are getting it live, I'll be back at approximately 5:15 tomorrow evening. So until next time, namaste.